What mistake should have killed you? Story 1. One time when I was young and carefree, I was riding a motorcycle for maybe the second time at about 30 miles per hour, and something in my brain just misfired. I thought, I wonder what would happen if I crossed my arms and held the left handlebar with my right hand and the right with my left. I'll tell you what happened. I narrowly missed oncoming traffic and crashed right into a wall. Story 2. When I was in high school, a few friends and I lied to our parents and told them we were spending the night at each other's houses. In reality, we had gone backpacking up a snowy Idaho mountain in the middle of winter without telling anyone where we were going. We were all fairly inexperienced in winter backpacking. The friend in charge of bringing food brought chicken he had cooked at home so we could eat it cold in case we couldn't start a fire. Luckily, I had brought a can of chili and didn't eat the chicken. I woke up the following morning to a fresh foot of snow, and my friends were throwing up outside the tent. We had left our boots outside, and they were completely frozen through. The shoelaces of my boots were stiff and wouldn't bend. One other friend and I were not sick, so we had to pack up the tent, the coldest and hardest work I've ever done. I gave one of my sick friends my gloves because he couldn't find his. We were about 3 miles into the hike, and the trail we had taken in was completely covered, and none of us were familiar enough with it to remember the way back. I took all but one pack and ran down the trail to the car, making my best guess on which way to turn, marking those choices with ski poles. I got to the car, started it to warm it up, and checked if we had cell reception. We didn't. Then I ran back up the trail to where they were, and we carried them back to the car. When I got home, I felt awful. My entire body ached from the cold and exhaustion. I was chilled to the bone, and when I got home, I started vomiting and looked pale and sickly. My dad was angry because he thought I was hungover, and I accepted that punishment rather than dealing with the absolute fury that would have come if he knew why I was actually in that condition. Story 3. When I was around 13, my mom bought an old house and asked me to clean out the garage. We didn't have a key, so I climbed in through the window and tried to open the garage door. It was an old door you had to open manually. I crouched down and started pulling it up, and the top half came off the rails and swung down, hitting me right in the head. I woke up who knows how long after with a cut on my head and blood all over. It's the only time I've ever been knocked out. Turns out my mom knew it was broken and forgot to tell me. Story 4. I remember organizing my room when I was about 10. I had a lava lamp on the verge of falling off my cabinet, but I didn't notice until I heard a loud shatter on the floor. For some reason, my brain thought it was a good idea to pick up all the shards. I stepped on a huge piece of glass and passed out from the pain. I woke up in a hospital bed and realized the shard was removed from my foot. It was stitched up, and I saw relieved looks on my family's faces. Turns out, when I passed out, I hit my head on the cement floor. I was living in my parents' basement, cracked my skull partially open, and was bleeding heavily. My family thought I was dead. Story 5. When I was a kid in grade school, my mom told me to meet her at a local park because we were going to have a picnic with family. I had just gotten my first phone, a Nokia. This will be relevant later. Anyway, I got to the park around 30 minutes early, so I sat down on a bench and played Snake on my phone. Then this guy approached me. He asked if I was a local. My city is known to be a tourist destination. I said yes, and then he asked if I knew the way to a local tourist spot. Now, I was young and naive, and despite being taught about stranger danger, I was eager to help a tourist find his way. I told him yes, I knew the way. Then he asked if I could show him the way. Being a naive kid, I agreed. There were a lot of ways to get to this tourist spot, but this guy asked if we could pass by a certain route because he wanted to stop by his hotel and get a Game Boy to give to me for being so helpful. I had never owned a game console, so I got excited and agreed. Along the way, he talked about all the kids he had given Game Boys to and how happy he had made them. At the time, I believed he was legit and just liked making kids happy. He even gave me 100 pesos, around $2, because I was being so helpful. Once we got near the hotel, we stopped, and he said he needed to make a call. After his call, he said his roommate had left and he didn't have a key, so we would just go to the original destination because that's where the Game Boy was. I was okay with that since I had time to kill. Now from the park, there were multiple ways we could have gone to get to this destination, because the park is in the center of the city. The fastest way, though, was through a road that had fewer people and less traffic. This didn't raise any red flags for me because I was still very naive. So I told him the fastest way was through that secluded road. He seemed like a nice guy, and we chatted along the way. When we were about a quarter of the way through that secluded road, my mom called, She asked where I was, and I told her I was helping a tourist and was on a secluded road. My mom freaked out and told me to get out of there immediately. I had never heard my mom so panicked and mad, so I told the guy I was sorry and ran away. He didn't chase me, but just stared as I ran. I met up with my family. My mom was angry at me for going with a stranger. We had our picnic and everything was fine. When we got our weekly newspaper, I was excited to check the Sunday comics. But on the front page of the paper, there was a report about a group abducting children for organ trafficking. To be honest, I didn't connect the dots until I was in high school. Story 6. I passed out in the woods after running from the cops. I was at a party in college and decided I was done, so I started walking home. I got about half a mile from campus when a cop pulled over to talk to me. It was like 3 a.m., and I couldn't walk in a straight line on the sidewalk because I was drunk. My instant reaction to seeing the blue lights was to bolt into the woods at full speed. Naturally, I couldn't see what obstacles were in my way, so at some point I tried to either climb a fence or ran through thorn bushes. Eventually, I ran headfirst into a tree and fell down. I had probably the most absurd thought I've ever had. If I hold my breath, the cops won't see me. So I did that and passed out while lying on my back in the woods. I woke up a few hours later as the sun was coming up and realized I had shredded my clothes, and my face and arms looked like I had been attacked by an animal with all the scratches. The worst one was a vertical cut that ran down the interior of my forearm, starting at my wrist. This happened 12 years ago, and I can still see the scar from that particular cut. The rest have healed and faded, but that one is still prominent. If it had been a little deeper, I have no doubt I would have bled out while lying on the ground in the woods, if I didn't already die from alcohol poisoning. Story 7. I was in a rural area and didn't notice some disturbed dirt on the road we were driving on. But my lieutenant in the passenger seat freaked out because his life flashed before his eyes. He literally curled into a ball in his seat. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he was sure there was something back there. We were currently escorting troop carriers to drop off a foot patrol in the middle of nowhere. So after we completed our drop-off, we went back on his order to check out the spot. My truck was the only one with an RF jammer, so I took the lead up to the spot my lieutenant had seen. When I saw it, I thought to myself, how did I not see that? I was the demo guy since we didn't have enough EOD in the area, so I went up to it, saw the pressure plate and wires, and dug it up. There it was, a battery with the acid all leaked out. They hadn't buried it deep enough, and it was the middle of summer. It was about 130 degrees Fahrenheit out, not good for the battery. Under the battery and pressure plate was a box about the size of a footlocker filled with explosives and accelerant. If it had gone off, my whole truck would have been dust. We had to do a controlled demolition since EOD was busy, and after we took it out, half the road had a 5-foot deep crater in it. Story 8. I was in a car crash at 80 kilometers per h. I hit a car that was going through a red light perpendicular to my direction of travel and came to a dead stop after hitting the back quarter panel and wheel of their car. They barrel rolled 3 times into the nature strip. I hit the windscreen with my head because I'm 6'5" and wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Both the other driver and I walked away unscathed, which was the most surprising part. I was taken to the hospital because I hit the windscreen with my head, but I was released after some scans came back okay. I don't know what saved me or the other driver that day, but for several seconds after the impact, I thought I had died. Then I realized I was just a bit dazed but generally fine, followed by moments of disbelief and relief. Story 9. I had a very rebellious phase. At one point, I ran away from home for a week and hitchhiked across the country with one of my friends. For context, we were both 15, 16 years old at the time. One of the cars that gave us a ride was driven by 2 suspicious-looking foreigners, older men who spoke Turkish among themselves, and only one could communicate with us in our native language. We were too naive to notice the red flags. It finally hit us when they passed our exit and refused to let us go after we pointed out their mistake. I had to fake that my father knew where I was and was expecting me at a certain place at a certain time, not even knowing if that would work. Miraculously, it did, and they let us go, in the middle of nowhere. We had to hitch another ride home. Looking back, I was incredibly foolish. Story 10. When I was around 5 years old, I was playing with the laundry chute in my childhood home. My cousins and I took turns dropping things down the chute while someone else stood at the bottom and dodged them. For the most part, we dropped things like washcloths, stuffed animals, and clothes. But when it was my turn to stand under the chute, my cousin dropped a 5 pounds dumbbell. Expecting something harmless, I didn't get out of the way. That ended the game really quickly. Now I part my hair in a way that hides the bald spot scar on my head. Story 11. I was a foolish ensign in the Navy, and we were in port in Aqaba, Jordan. Some people from the ship, including myself, decided to take a tour of Petra. Petra is an ancient Stone Age city, most famous for being the filming location for the third Indiana Jones movie, where the Holy Grail was featured. That stone temple in the canyon? It's usually packed with tourists, and there's a tent nearby selling overpriced wares. Since the tour was organized by the ship, we had a guide and even some plainclothes police or special forces as security, likely due to the geopolitical situation. ISIS was very active at the time, which made everyone, including me, nervous. We went as a group through the ancient city to a restaurant at the bottom of the trail for lunch. Afterward, we were allowed to explore the city on our own and make our way back to the bus. Here's where I messed up. I wanted to ride a camel back up, thinking it would be cool. I asked a guy, but he couldn't arrange a camel, so another person offered me a ride on a mule for cheap. I figured that was just as fun. They were heading back to their village and spoke with my tour guide, who agreed to let them take me up, promising I'd get a car ride back to the bus later. A little way up the mountain path, I realized I was an American military officer, alone, heading to a small village in the Middle East with strangers planning to get in their car. I quickly told them I had changed my mind and wanted to go back to the city. They tried to haggle with me, saying it would cost extra to turn around. I figured losing money was better than losing my head, so I agreed to pay the extra cost for them to take me back. They accepted, and I spent the rest of the time trying to catch up with the scattered tour group. I still haven't calculated how much money I lost that day, but at least I made it back safely. Lesson learned: always use the buddy system when traveling, so at least one of you might have some common sense. Story 12. This was 13 years ago. I was skateboarding with some friends at a busy shopping center. A few minutes before leaving, we were waiting at a crosswalk. One of my friends took off running across, and my other buddies followed. Naturally, I joined them without paying attention to the light, but the lane was green. My two friends in front were fine, but another friend and I were both hit by a U-Haul truck. Yes, really. A bright orange U-Haul going 40 to 45 miles per hour. My friend didn't get hit too badly, but I got hit square in the chest. I didn't even realize what had happened at first. I was running, then suddenly I was on the ground, dazed with no pain. Instinctively, I got up and ran back to the sidewalk, not realizing I had been hit. A nurse who was at the light came over to help me. She explained what had happened and helped keep me calm, asking if I was having trouble breathing. I was, but I thought it was my asthma. Later, it turned out both my lungs were punctured. The ambulance showed up. I felt oddly okay, though I was having trouble breathing. They only had one stretcher, so my friend was lying on it while I sat hunched over on the bench for the ride. I wish I were joking. We got to the hospital, and I tried to get up, but my shoulders hurt too much to move. The EMS crew said I'd probably just dislocated them and would be fine after a quick pop back in. Then we were put in the waiting room. No joke. They thought we just fell off our skateboards. I was still feeling all right, watching Wheel of Fortune, until I suddenly started feeling clammy and disoriented. I remember hearing my mom screaming, "He's going into shock!" Next thing I knew, I was being rushed down hallways with those overhead lights flashing by. The pain hit hard, the worst pain I've ever felt. But I couldn't be given painkillers yet because they needed to run tests first. They had to pick me up off the bed to move me onto one of the machines, and just that movement was agony. After a series of tests, they found both my lungs were punctured, both collarbones were broken, I had broken ribs, a cracked sternum, and a concussion. I spent a couple of weeks in the ICU and was eventually transferred to a children's hospital since there weren't any beds available. That turned out to be nice, as I got visited by people singing and bringing teddy bears. Plus, I got to watch Lord of the Rings all the time while on morphine. Recovery was tough, and I ended up seeing a renowned clavicle specialist. He was impressed that I had broken both collarbones, explaining that the force required to do that usually results in death. But I eventually made a full recovery. I was scared to cross the street for a while, but otherwise no lasting issues. Story 13. When I was 8 years old, I fell down my friend's basement stairs and hit my head on the concrete floor. I was knocked out and screaming, so they airlifted me to a major city hospital. I woke up a couple of days later missing a tooth. I found out later that when they were putting in the breathing tube, it knocked my tooth down my throat, which scared the doctors. but I was thrilled because I got to play Super Smash Bros. Melee for the first time in the hospital game room and ate Jell-O for meals. What I didn't know was that I had gradually gotten worse over 48 hours, until I had zero brain activity for about 6 minutes. Apparently, I technically died, but my family didn't tell me that part until later, because who tells an 8-year-old they died? Story 14. One of the dumbest things I've ever done happened when I was 19, about 2 years ago. I went to the gun safe to show my girlfriend the nice new pistol I had inherited from a family member. I hadn't fired it yet and was absolutely sure it was unloaded. My girlfriend was really nervous about guns, so to show her it was safe, I pointed it at my own head and pulled the trigger. Without realizing it, I instinctively moved the gun away from my head just before it went off. It couldn't have missed my head by more than an inch. I still wonder why I'm still here, and I thank God for saving me that day. That moment changed how I handle firearms forever. I now treat every gun as if it's loaded, which is what you should always do. Story 15. Around 2005 to 2006, I went to a taping of The Conan O'Brien Show in NYC. After the show, my 2 friends and I were walking down Broadway when we heard a guy selling fake IDs. We were 19, so we asked how much. He said $150 each, and we agreed. We followed him to a Wendy's where he asked the cashier for a white screen. He took us to the side and took our photos in front of the screen, saying he had the printer in the basement. We followed him down a dark stairwell, which seemed sketchy. As we reached the bottom, his associate separated us. I went with the guy, and he led me to an empty room with just a table and chair. At that moment, I thought I was dead. He turned around and pointed a gun at me. He took all my money and my watch, then told me to put my head on the table and count to 1,000. When I finished counting, I went back upstairs, and my friends were sitting at a table. They had been robbed too. The Wendy's employee who had helped the guy was gone, and the other workers acted like they didn't know anything. We figured this must be some sort of operation they had going on there. Story 16. I was riding my motorcycle like a reckless fool on back roads. I thought my buddy gave the signal that we were going to pass a car on a double yellow line. Without thinking, I swerved into the next lane. I was immediately greeted by a work truck with a utility bed, wider than a normal truck. I was already ahead of my buddy and almost next to the minivan I thought we were passing. With no other option, I decided to pin it and ride straight down the middle of the double yellow line, hoping to squeeze through. I should have ended up as a grease stain on the road. I had to pull over afterward and think long and hard about what had just happened. I don't ride on the streets much anymore after that. I found the racetrack, and I'm much happier taking my wild riding to a closed course these days. Story 17. A few months ago, I was lying on the rocks at Taft Point in Yosemite, face down, looking over the edge. I crawled back from the edge, got on my hands and knees to stand up, and my foot caught on my backpack. As I stood up, I tripped and stumbled toward the edge. I managed to stop myself, catching my hand right by the lip of the edge. Thinking about it still gives me a rush of terror, and I'm sickened by how close I came to falling hundreds of feet down. Years ago, I had another close call, this time 100 feet underwater on a scuba dive in the Mediterranean Sea. The rubber piping connecting my breather to my air tank collapsed under pressure. It hadn't been properly maintained, and I started inhaling water instead of air. I switched to my second breather, but it was leaking water too. I was drowning, and my dive buddy was inexperienced, so he swam off without checking on me. If I shot to the surface, I'd get the bends and die. If I stayed, I'd drown. With no oxygen left, my vision narrowed, and all I could think about was getting out of there. In my panic, I inflated my BCD, buoyancy control device, dumped my weight belt, and shot upward. But then I felt something pulling me down. It was another diver grabbing me and deflating my BCD. My panicked brain thought, "He's trying to drown you." I reached to pull off his mask, but we made eye contact, and that snapped me back to my senses. I reached for his spare breather, sucked in the air, and immediately calmed down. We surfaced together, spending time at the right depth to avoid the bends. It turns out he was the guy responsible for maintaining the gear. The crack in the rubber pipe was likely caused by poor maintenance. Salt and heat had weakened the material. I wasn't sure whether to thank him or be angry, so I had a beer, smoked some cigarettes, and reflected on my life. Story 18. 3 days ago, I developed a bad cough from getting sick. I hate how coughing tears up my throat, so I finished off a bottle of Delsim and bought 2 bottles of Theraflu, thinking I could sip it throughout the day to keep the cough away. And that's what I did. By 7 p.m. on Tuesday, I'd gone through half a bottle of Theraflu. No big deal. The next morning, the cough persisted, so I kept drinking, and by 11 a.m., I had gone through both bottles. I didn't bother reading the label because, well, it's cough syrup. How bad could it be? Turns out very bad. Each 30 milliliters dose of Theraflu contains 650 milligrams of acetaminophen, and with 245.5 milliliters per bottle, I had consumed nearly 10,000 milligrams of acetaminophen. The recommended max dose is around 3,000 milligrams, and the upper limit is 4,000 milligrams. I had ingested over double the danger zone amount. The next 36 hours were spent flushing my system with fluids, on the advice of a nurse friend, and closely monitoring for signs of liver failure. Thankfully, I've been fine so far, but it was a close call. Story 19. As a teen in the 90s, my friends and I dropped a bunch of LSD and got into a car with another group of teens who were also tripping. We drove down dark, twisty, 25 miles per hour mountain roads at 60 mph with the headlights off. At one point, we almost hit a random cow standing in the middle of the road. We were tripping so hard that we stopped the car and got out to touch the cow because none of us were sure if it was real. It was real, and the authorities had been looking for it. They found us standing around it in awe while our car was still blasting terrible local techno. We got arrested, but instead of charging us, the police just called our parents to pick us up. Honestly, that was worse than being arrested. I'm amazed I made it past my 20s. When I turned 40, I had to take a moment to convince myself I was still alive. I wonder how I've managed to survive this long because my decision-making abilities have always been questionable. Life has been a series of chaotic events, and all I can do is try to stay afloat. My head's still above water, so I guess I'm doing okay. Story 20. In 2001, when I was 15, I asked a friend if I could drive his brand new Jeep Wrangler home from golf practice. He agreed, even though I had only driven a handful of times with my parents. The top was off, and I wasn't wearing a seatbelt because we weren't far from home. I was going about 70 miles per hour on a windy country road when I dropped a tire off the pavement. I overcorrected, ran off the road, and flipped the Jeep 3 times. At some point, I was thrown from the vehicle. The Jeep came to rest upright in a field, and the property owner who trained horses saw everything. He ran over to help and literally held my head together because I was bleeding like a stuck pig. They tried to land a helicopter in the field to take me to a trauma center, but they couldn't get permission, so I was taken to a local hospital in an ambulance. I lost consciousness on the way, so they performed emergency surgery to stop internal bleeding. If they hadn't checked me, I would have died in the helicopter. After a few hours, I was flown to another medical center where they discovered the extent of my injuries: broken right foot, broken right leg, broken left collarbone, 8 broken ribs, lacerated liver, collapsed lung, and 56 staples in my head. I spent 45 days in the hospital. My liver injury caused bile peritonitis, which made my abdomen swell rapidly. I went from a 34 waist to a 46 waist in 2 days due to fluid buildup. I was eventually transferred to a university hospital and spent over a month there. I couldn't swing a golf club for almost a year. I lost 30 pounds in the hospital and have no memory of the accident or the 2 days that followed. To this day, I wear my seatbelt religiously, and I'm grateful to the doctors who saved my life. Story 21. Was it my mistake? Maybe it was that one combo of medication that was known to have bad side effects. I can't remember exactly what they were. I scared the heck out of my mom, though. Apparently, it should have made my blood pressure really low or something. I remember the combo included cough syrup. I just dissociated for a bit and took a nap. Woke up feeling sore. Or maybe it was the time I ran into the road in a complete panic after seeing someone who had told me they were going to hurt me the next time they saw me. That's a long story. Someone else's mistake. That award probably goes to my old psychiatrist. I'd been off my psych meds for a bit since I missed my appointment and couldn't get rescheduled for literally 2-3 months. One of the reasons I left his care. As I was later told by my current psychiatrist and the doctors at the ER, my old psychiatrist really messed up. After being off my meds for 2-3 months, they were completely out of my system. What my psychiatrist, let's call him Dr. G, should have done was gradually bring me back to my correct dose or add 1 med at a time. Dr. G didn't. He told me to start taking all my meds, 3 in total, at full dose immediately. A few days to a week later, I was at school and feeling off, lightheaded, dizzy, and unable to focus on my work. I was in a special program, so I spent most of the day in one room. The teacher there knew me well, but it still took over an hour to convince her I needed to see the nurse. To be fair, I had been going through a rebellious streak and hated being in that room all day, so I often tried to find excuses to leave. Eventually, though, my teacher noticed I was looking pale and mumbling my words. That's when she personally escorted me to the nurse. I tried to explain what Dr. G had told me to do, but my words weren't coming out right, and I started crying out of frustration and panic. The nurse took my blood pressure, which was not normal, and called my house. My dad or uncle picked me up shortly after. I ate some food and drank water, which helped a bit since my blood sugar was low. My family started to figure out a plan, but I was still feeling terrible. My mom, rest in peace, knew of a rare but potentially deadly side effect, serotonin syndrome. I matched about half the symptoms, which scared everyone. My dad or uncle, I can't remember who, took me to the ER. They put me under some kind of suicide watch, in a room with lots of windows right next to the nurse's station. It turned out I had serotonin shock, which is similar to serotonin syndrome. It was a good thing I went to the ER as I was also really dehydrated, so they gave me fluids. They stabilized me enough to go home but told me not to take my psych meds until I could see Dr. G. That took another 2 months, and by that time I was fed up. Since I was an adult by then, I found a new psychiatrist. I've been with a different clinic for almost a year now, and they've done more to help me in that time than all 3 previous psychiatrists combined. Not to mention, the former ones misdiagnosed me and claimed that a child couldn't have PTSD. Story 22. I live in Texas. When I was a young child, my family drove out to a scenic spot in the hill country to look at wildflowers. I must have been about 6 years old at the time. We arrived at the top of this hill, and at the bottom was a huge field of bluebonnets. Of course, I took off running down the hill to see the flowers. I was too young and naive to understand gravity and slopes, so halfway down, I completely lost control of my legs and started hurtling down the hillside like the Flash. The problem was that there was solid rock at the base of the hill. Right before the flowers started, I started screaming, convinced I was done for. Luckily, my dad saw my mistake before I did and took off running after me. All I remember is my body practically flying perpendicular to the hill as the rocks got closer. Suddenly, I was lifted into the air. My dad had managed to sprint down the hill at an angle and snatched me up just before I hit the rocks. It was incredible, and his dad reflexes saved the day. Story 23. Early in my law enforcement career, I was ridiculously naive and excited to show off my sidearm to anyone who showed the slightest interest, even people who didn't seem to care. I'd jump at any chance to unholster my shiny .38 special and hand it over to whoever gave it a second glance. I felt cool and powerful whenever I had the gun on my hip, and even more so when people noticed it. One evening, a complete stranger came to the counter at the station and asked a few questions about my revolver. He seemed nice enough. Without hesitation, I grabbed the gun from my holster and handed it to him, without unloading it first. I was confident that this complete stranger, my new gun buddy, would know how to handle it, based on the excellent character judgment I had made in less than 2 minutes. Within seconds, I realized how wrong I was. The man had no idea how to handle a firearm and managed to sweep the muzzle past me twice with his finger on the trigger. "Wow, it's heavier than I thought," he said. I gasped and almost passed out from fear. Gently, I coaxed the gun back from him. Later, I died 1,000 deaths inside when I found out he was a parolee signing in as part of his release conditions. Story 24. When I was about 5 years old, I visited a snowy area for the first time, but the snow was all icy and hard. I didn't want to go on the larger slopes with a sled, but I found a smaller slope where a parent was helping some kids sled down. The slope was maybe 1 to 2 feet tall, and the kids were even younger than me. I asked if I could try, and the parent was nice enough to let me. I leaned into the motion, going much further than the younger kids since I knew how to sled. The problem was that I went way farther than I expected, heading straight toward a sheer cliff about 100 feet high, with cars at the bottom. I panicked. My only hope was to crash into a single telephone pole along the way. It felt like an eternity, but I did crash into it, giving me a clear view of the cliff I almost went over. I was pretty shaken up and spent the rest of the day sitting on a bench. I still don't know why there weren't any guardrails or why they were sledding so close to the cliff. Story 25. This might get buried since I'm late to the thread, but here's my story. I was on my way to work when I ran out of gas. The gas gauge had been acting up, so I didn't bother checking it before I left, assuming I had enough. As soon as I realized I was out of gas, I coasted off the freeway onto a service road and turned onto a residential street to park. After my car died, I took a look around. The area didn't seem great. Dilapidated houses with wire and iron fences, and a condemned building down the street. It wasn't the type of place where you'd let your kids play outside. Even though I'm a woman, I've always been independent and street smart. I was sure I could handle myself. So, I called AAA for the first time, got them on the way, and called work to let them know I'd be late. Then I noticed that the house across the street from where I was parked had people constantly getting dropped off. They'd go up to the gate, exchange goods, and leave. Oh no, I had parked in front of a drug house. I debated turning on my hazard lights to show I wasn't a threat, just a woman with car trouble, but I also didn't want to advertise my helplessness. The people started noticing me, staring and pointing. Cars began driving by slowly and I met their gaze, trying to convey a mix of I'm not afraid and I'm not a threat. Finally, a big guy in a truck pulled up next to me, coming the opposite way down the street. He stared at me, not breaking eye contact. I shrugged and mouthed, "What's up?" trying to act calm. He didn't respond but just stayed there, blocking the street and my exit. At that point, I started realizing I might be in actual danger. Then, like an angel, a truck turned the corner from the service road and faced off with the guy blocking me. The guy in the truck backed up, and my AAA guy pulled in next to me. He took one look around and said, "Let's do this quick." We put some gas in my tank, and I tried to pay him for the gas, but he refused. "No, lady. Let's just get out of here." He pulled in front of me to block the street as I backed up and turned around, heading for the service road. He followed me. There was a gas station just a few hundred feet away, but I would rather have run out of gas again somewhere else than stay there another minute. Story 26. When I was 14, I went to a house party. The host was a girl I really liked, and I was shy and insecure. That led me to down 6 large shots of vodka within an hour. When it didn't seem to kick in, I drank some Malibu too. I woke up in the hospital not knowing where I was, with my mom staring at me from the other end of the bed. It was one of the stupidest things I've ever done, but I didn't understand how strong alcohol was at the time. I later found out the girls had been pushing me down carpeted stairs while I was passed out. Looking back, it's clear I didn't care about myself at all. Don't do stupid things for the sake of impressing girls, my fellow guys. Be yourself, and don't think you need to get completely wrecked to have fun. Story 27. This past summer, my best friend and I decided to take a trip up north to spend a night on top of a mountain. Our plan was simple. Enjoy the view and have some beers. We didn't plan much for shelter since my buddy is a hardcore military guy who can survive in almost any condition. We don't see each other much, so this trip was going to be the highlight of our summer. We started the drive in a rainstorm, a little annoyed at the weather, but laughing at all the people bailing out of their Labor Day plans. With less traffic than usual, we made good time. As we drove, the sky cleared and everything felt perfect. We had our favorite songs blasting, and we couldn't stop talking about how great everything was. The only issue was that we had to keep making stops for random stuff like beer, flashlights, and snacks. It was frustrating at the time, but later we realized those stops probably saved us. When we finally reached the parking lot, we were flooded with texts from friends and family warning us about an incoming thunderstorm. We laughed it off and assured them we'd be fine. We grabbed our gear and started the hike. The views were beautiful, although it was getting dark. The mountain stands alone in the area, so the distant thunder and flashes of lightning made us feel like kids doing something a little dangerous. Just as we were about to reach the top, the storm completely surrounded us. Lightning and thunder were all around, and we started to get nervous. We stopped for a break, trying to take pictures of the storm, when a bolt of lightning struck no more than 300 yards away. We exchanged panicked looks, quickly packed our things, and started heading back down. Then the rain started, hard. Every step down felt like we were getting closer to disaster. The lightning and thunder were getting closer, and the rain was so heavy I had to look down while running, or it would get in my eyes. The trail quickly turned into a series of rivers and puddles, making it impossible to remember where we had messed up on the way up. All we could do was run. We eventually made it back to his Jeep, completely soaked, but we checked ourselves for injuries as we had both fallen multiple times. Somehow we were unscathed. Looking back, we realized that the delays on the drive saved our lives. If we had made it to the summit and set up camp before the storm hit, our plan was to get drunk, and we would have been caught in the storm. It's a miracle we made it out safely. Story 28. Being young and reckless, I completely underestimated the dangers of driving. I was merging onto the off-ramp lane and was too busy messing with my radio to notice a Jeep in the lane I was about to merge into. The Jeep was speeding up, trying to pass the car in the slow lane. I didn't see the huge Jeep with massive wheels and ended up sideswiping it with my tiny car. I panicked and jerked the wheel to the left, hitting the brakes. After a second of terror, I found myself in the grass. I straightened the wheel, eased off the brakes, and let the rough terrain slow the car down. If I had continued to panic, I might have flipped the car back onto the highway lanes and been hit by one of the many semis on the road that day. The guy I hit was understandably upset, but after checking, he found no damage to his car. He still waited for a highway patrol officer to write me a ticket, as a lesson not to mess around while driving. Since that day, I've been much more cautious, checking mirrors, watching for cars, and doing everything I can to avoid accidents. I haven't had a wreck since, and I've avoided many thanks to staying alert. Story 29. When I was about 5, my family and some friends went on a picnic to a remote area with a natural pool about 20 feet deep. We kids found some sticks and played with them while the adults were eating. At one point, my stick fell into the pool and was floating. I kneeled to reach for it, leaned too far, and fell in. I didn't know how to swim, so I struggled and could have easily drowned. The adults were too far away to notice, and I was close to blacking out when I felt someone grab my foot and pull me out. When I looked up, I saw it was one of the teenagers from the picnic who just happened to be walking by and noticed me struggling. He saved my life. Story 30. It was spring break, and I was at my great-uncle's farm in the Appalachian Mountains. I slipped and fell down a steep, wet hill. I tumbled down headfirst and should have landed on my head, but I tucked my head in at the last second and drove my shoulder into the ground. I felt the impact, followed by a crunching sound like biting down on too many carrots at once. For a couple of seconds, I was in shock, wondering how I survived. Then, an intense wave of pain hit me. I tried to stand, but the pain was too much, and I fell back down, screaming for my brother to get my dad. My brother thought I had just pulled a muscle, so he tried massaging my shoulder. Normally, I like a hard massage when I have a knot, but not when I have a broken collarbone. The pain was unbearable. My brother saw the look of terror on my face and ran to get my dad. At first, my dad was reluctant to take me to the ER, but when my mom heard me screaming over the phone, she insisted. I couldn't lift my arm above shoulder height. It felt like I could, but physically, I couldn't. The pain was relentless. It was like stubbing your toe over and over again, but in my collarbone. Luckily, the broken piece of bone hadn't shifted enough to require surgery, but I had to sit in a chair for the rest of spring break. Story 31. When I was 8 years old, I was playing with some kids at an Easter gathering for a family I wasn't a part of. My dad was dating one of the women. We started playing tag in the backyard while the adults were chatting on the patio. There was an old homemade playset with a slide and swings that looked like it had been around for generations. It made for a natural obstacle for us kids to run around and use to escape each other. Someone would climb up the ladder to the playset, and the others would chase them up. I was chasing another kid, and he climbed the ladder into the playset, so I followed him. I felt the ladder give way a little as I went up, but I was 8 and didn't think much of it. A minute later, I tried to go up the ladder again, and this time it broke. I fell backward and landed on a sheet of plywood, hitting the edge with my arm, which snapped. It was a nasty break that messed up my hand. I've since lost some functionality and a few fingers on my left hand. They still work, but I couldn't pursue guitar or piano as I had wanted to as a kid. Even long sessions of PC gaming are tough for me now, although MOBAs are okay. Here's the weird part. I landed about 3 feet to the left of the ladder. I wasn't turning or moving left or right. I should have landed straight back. But for some reason, I didn't. If I had landed directly under the ladder, my arm would have been fine. But when I landed and turned my head, I saw a nail the size of my 8-year-old head sticking up from the plywood. If I'd landed where I should have, that nail could have killed me. I've never understood how or why that happened. Just dumb luck, I guess. Story 32. It shouldn't have killed me, but it could have seriously injured a kid. I lived in England for a year as an au pair, and I had just gotten my driver's license back in Canada a few months earlier, so I was still new to driving. When I arrived in England, I had to learn to drive stick on the other side of the road, which I managed to do in a week, but I sometimes forgot I wasn't in an automatic. One night, after taking the kids to swimming lessons, we were all tired and rushing inside the house. The older boy got out of the back seat and walked around the front of the car toward the door, which is when I realized I hadn't pulled the parking brake. The car started rolling toward the house, almost pinning my host kid against it. Luckily, my friend was visiting and noticed the car moving. She dove into the small gap and held the car off long enough for me to yank the parking brake. Everyone was fine, and I gave the kids extra dessert to ensure their silence. The kid who almost got pinned thought it was hilarious and laughed about it the whole evening. Story 33. I was on a youth group trip, and when we arrived at the church where we were staying, we had to set up our sleeping arrangements, which were just sleeping bags and air mattresses. While doing that, the boys got distracted and started doing what boys do, stupid stuff. In this case, we were holding one of the smaller air mattresses up in the air while the others would somersault over it. Each time someone successfully flipped over it, we'd raise the mattress higher. Eventually, we were dive rolling over the mattress onto the hard basement carpet, which had no padding and felt like concrete. I wasn't the most athletic kid, but I thought, hey, I didn't do too bad in gymnastics during gym class, so I gave it a try. On my first dive roll, I forgot to tuck my head. Instead of doing a somersault, I dived headfirst into the ground. Here's what I remember. I ran up, dived over the mattress, and then felt my head hit the ground, followed by the sensation of my neck and vertebrae crunching. I distinctly thought, this is how I die. Mom is going to kill me. My back was sore, and I was completely winded. There was an eerie silence before everyone rushed over to check on me. I was only able to wheeze. I've never been so winded in my life. Later, my friend told me what it looked like to everyone else. Apparently, when my head hit the ground, it planted, and my back arched so much that I kicked myself in the back of the head with my feet. The sound of my impact made everyone think I had died. So yeah, I dove headfirst into the ground, cracked my back, and bent like a pretzel, trying to kick my teeth out from behind. That, or the time my mom accidentally hit my head against the wall when I was a baby, and I needed 7 stitches at 8 weeks old. Story 34. In high school, I worked at a local water park, which only had 4 slides. 3 were made of concrete, and you used foam mats to slide down. The 4th was made of plastic, and you used rubber tubes. I was the lifeguard on duty at age 16 when a brief rain shower started, so we shut down the slides. I had a mat from the concrete slides that I was sitting on at my post. The slides developed a film from having water running all day, and sometimes we'd slide down the concrete slides without water, using soap on the mats. We called it dry sliding. I got the bright idea to try it on the tube slide, even though the water was shut off. I had to get down the hill anyway. Well, the rain combined with the day's slime created perfect conditions for me to slide completely out of the tube, fly over the side, flip in the air, and fall about 20 feet, landing on my upper back. I should have broken my neck or my back, but I jumped up without a scratch. I was incredibly lucky I didn't kill myself. Some parents who were visiting the park had a few choice words for me about being a poor role model for their kids. Story 35. In high school, I built a funky custom skateboard, a short board with an old pair of shoes bolted to it. One Saturday, my buddies and I drove up a mountain road to try longboarding down. The road was steep and narrow with a sheer cliff on one side. Without thinking, I strapped my feet into the shoes on the board and started rolling down the hill without a helmet or any protective gear. I quickly gained speed and realized I was in deep trouble. The board was wobbly, and I couldn't bail because my feet were literally bolted to it. I didn't know how to do a skid stop on that board, and the road was too narrow to try any sharp turns. I had a totally out-of-control descent, but somehow I managed to avoid crashing. When I finally came to a stop at the bottom of the mountain, it was one of those holy crap I can't believe I'm alive moments. Story 36. My friends and I went to Lake Cushman in Washington State. It's a big lake that used to have an old lumber mill, which was torn down years ago. I can't be sure, but there were a lot of old logs and dead trees floating in the water. Throughout the day, my friends and I had been jumping off a bridge, high enough to be thrilling, but not high enough to be dangerous. At some point, we lost track of some friends and one of their cousins, but we just assumed they went back to the campsite. Soon after, those friends showed up, paddling in with a massive dead tree. The rest of us swam over to help bring it back to shore, and a few kayakers even joined in, giving us tips on how to paddle. Eventually, we got stuck in the middle of the lake and had to abandon the tree. The kayakers left first, and I eventually swam off too, heading for a rock and then back to camp. I'm a decent swimmer, but I'm no Michael Phelps. I started to struggle, taking in some water, so I closed my eyes and back-paddled to rest. It was exhausting, and I wasn't even halfway to camp. Luckily, one of the kayakers came back, told me to hold on, and paddled me to the shore. I don't think I would have made it without that intervention. Story 37. At my first job, there was a guy who wasn't well liked. He made rude and callous comments, and every time a female coworker said she was hungry, he'd suggest she was pregnant. He was known as a jerk in our department and even claimed to be a sociopath. Still, he paid a lot of attention to me, joking around. I was a bit disturbed by his weird comments, but brushed it off because I liked the attention, and I reciprocated the kidding around. One time, he asked if I wanted to go for ice cream. Feeling isolated and having only one long-distance friend, I accepted. He drove since I didn't have a car, and I didn't have my phone with me. But I thought I'd be fine. We were friends, more or less. The ice cream was fine, but when I said I wanted to go home, he didn't take me straight back. Instead, he started driving out into the middle of nowhere, saying we were going on an adventure. I grew increasingly stressed, kicking myself for not having my phone or transportation. Eventually, he said he wanted to show me his family's farm, and after that, he insisted on taking me to his house. I don't remember if he wanted to go inside, but he kept trying to kiss me. I had to explicitly say I didn't want to kiss him, but he kept pressing, saying, "But I want to kiss you," and asking why not. I felt terrible, thinking I'd let him on, but a few days later, I realized he was just a jerk. Not long after, he told me in front of two coworkers that he hated me with desire and anger. I said, "What?" But he ignored me, and everything continued as if nothing had happened. He never hurt me, but he easily could have. The lesson: always trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Never leave yourself vulnerable, especially when you're not completely sure someone is trustworthy. It's not worth putting yourself in danger. Story 38. My best friends and I decided to take a spring break road trip to Canada while we were in college at the University of Georgia. Why Canada? No real reason. We just wanted to do something different from everyone else. While they were going to the beach, we were going to camp in the snow. What could go wrong? Our destination was Algonquin Provincial Park, a large green area on a random map we found. It seemed remote enough, and we figured we could get there in about 4 days. Skipping over the long drive, we arrived at Algonquin just after sunset. It was snowing hard, and it was well below freezing. We later learned the temperature was about 3 degrees Fahrenheit, which was extreme for our southern blood. Not the best idea to find a campsite in the middle of the night during a snowstorm, but we were young and dumb, so we just parked in a random lot and hiked into the woods. After about 20 minutes of trudging through thigh-high snow, we found a large clearing. Perfect spot to set up camp, have a bite to eat, and relax. The snow was falling more heavily, so we decided to call it a night. That night I didn't sleep because I was freezing. Our sleeping bags weren't winterproof. They were the cheap, thin kind you get at Walmart. My socks had frozen solid during the hike to the site. Boots? Nope, just sneakers. So I put on 2 extra pairs, but my feet stayed numb the entire night. I spent about 7 hours shivering and rubbing my feet to keep the blood flowing. At one point, I watched my breath freeze to the top of the tent, and after a while, ice crystals would rain down on me. Before the sun came up, we heard slow, heavy footsteps outside the tent. We stayed silent as the animal rooted through the bags we had left outside. All of our food was in those bags. The animal ate most of it and then left. The next morning, we didn't see any tracks because the snow had covered them, but we guessed it was a bear or a moose. That was could have died moment #1. As soon as the sun rose, I walked back to the truck through the deep snow. My feet were frozen and wet, but thankfully the truck started. I turned the heat on full blast and sat in the parking lot for 90 minutes, relishing the warmth. Later, I learned my parents had a friend who died in a snowstorm back in New York in the 70s. He'd done something similar, but the exhaust fumes built up around his truck and fed back inside, and he passed out and died. That was possible death moment #2. If I hadn't been so cold and stayed awake, I might have fallen asleep in the truck and met the same fate. We stayed there for 2 more nights, actually having some fun hiking and exploring. We found an abandoned igloo that we should have camped in, but we stuck with our flimsy tent. We had a good laugh about it years later. The third should have been dead moment came when we visited the visitors center on our way out. We saw a large map of the park and found the trail we had hiked. At the end of the trail was a medium-sized lake. The clearing we had camped in was a frozen, snow-covered lake. We'd spent 3 days making fires and sleeping on top of a frozen lake. While it's possible the ice was thick enough, it's also possible it was thin, and we were inches away from falling through into icy water. Despite everything, we survived with no injuries. We spent the next night in a hotel, laughing nervously about how we could have easily died. It was a legendary trip that brought us closer together, and it was the coldest I've ever been. Story 39. When I was around 10 years old, I went camping with my dad, his friends, and their kids. Our campsite was in a clearing near a forest. It was dark, and while the dads were playing cards or something, the kids were running around. Some of my friends and I decided to go into the woods without a flashlight, but the moon was out, so we could see well enough. We went to a creek, splashed around for a bit, and then headed back. Later, I asked my dad if I could play with the adults. They told me that I had to be a member of their club, and to join, I had to get a cup of water from the creek in the woods without using a flashlight. I think they were trying to scare me, but since I'd already been in the woods earlier, I felt confident and decided to go for it. Halfway there, I realized I hadn't memorized the path as well as I thought. It was pitch black. I crouched down, slowly shuffling forward, feeling around for the path when suddenly I fell forward. Somehow I flipped over and landed flat on my back, completely knocking the wind out of me, and my glasses flew off. All I could do was softly call out for help. My dad must have been keeping an eye on me because he heard me and found me quickly. When he first saw me, he thought I might have broken bones. It turned out I had fallen about 12 feet off a small cliff created by erosion. I landed flat on my back in a dirt patch, surrounded by brush and small trees. Thankfully, I wasn't seriously injured, just some back and head pain. Later that night, we also had a tornado warning, and a tornado touched down not far from us while we were in tents. Story 40. When I was a kid, some friends and I were hanging out on train tracks that acted like a bridge over a road in our town. Sam and I were on one side, while my brother and Joey were on the other. Suddenly, my brother and Joey started running. Sam and I had no idea why until an angry man appeared out of nowhere, grabbed us, and threw us into the back of his Jeep. He explained that my brother and Joey had thrown rocks at his car, and he was going to take us to the police station. Sam and I were terrified, crying in the back, unsure of what would happen. Meanwhile, my brother somehow managed to follow this guy on his bike, yelling at him, calling him a child molester, and threatening him. I remember the man telling us, "Your friend has a dirty mouth," which was super creepy. At some point, the man realized that either my brother had his license plate number or that the police would arrest him for kidnapping. To this day, I owe my brother a huge debt of gratitude because Joey went straight home. If it weren't for my brother, who knows what would have happened to Sam and me. Story 41. My dad works in construction and has always been a bit of a daredevil. There are countless stories of him getting broken bones, jumping off cliffs into water, and surviving situations that would seriously injure most people. One time, he ran a mile with 2 broken feet to finish his boot camp. He even downed a bottle of whiskey beforehand and collapsed once he was done, asking for an ambulance. The most recent story, though, didn't involve any recklessness, just bad luck. My dad was working on the ground near some cranes when one of the thick metal cables snapped. It sliced up his leg from ankle to kneecap, though luckily not deep enough to need stitches. His coworkers took care of him on site, but he told me that if he had been standing just an inch closer, the cable would have killed him. Story 42. In middle school, 2 of my best friends and I planned a Nerf mission. One of my friends suspected his dad was cheating on his mom and claimed there was a photograph hidden somewhere that proved it. It was a dumb lie in hindsight. For some reason, we thought it would be a good idea to arm ourselves with Nerf guns. The mission started when my friend's parents went out to dinner. After playing a round of COD, World at War Zombies, we got ready. We had walkie-talkies and each of us had a Nerf gun. Our job was to find the locked box that supposedly contained the photograph. My role was to be the lookout while my 2 friends searched the house. I was stationed on the roof. This was a huge house with 4 stories, keeping an eye out for when the parents came back. At some point, I tripped and started sliding down the roof. I almost fell 4 stories down. I probably wouldn't have died, but it would have been a bad injury. We eventually found the box, and all it contained were condoms. Almost 7 years later, my friend's parents are still together. Story 43. When I was 18, I was a freshman in college, driving through rural Wisconsin with my boyfriend at the time. I unbuckled my seatbelt to get something out of the back seat when suddenly a deer jumped in front of the car. I screamed and we swerved into a ditch to avoid hitting it. The car rolled over and I was thrown out of the window. My boyfriend, who was buckled in, barely had a scratch on him. He found me unconscious a little ways away from the car and thought I was dead. I woke up in the hospital as I was being loaded into a helicopter to be airlifted to a trauma center. I had a badly broken wrist, which I apparently put in front of my face, to protect my head, and a broken leg. The orthopedic surgeon told my parents I probably wouldn't use my right hand again, but my parents asked him not to tell me that. I made a full recovery with no lasting issues aside from some scars and a slightly limited range of motion in my wrist. I was incredibly lucky. Story 44. When I was 12, I got on a ride at an amusement park with my 10-year-old sister. We were excited because it was the last ride of the night before heading back to the hotel. Our dad and great uncle were chatting nearby, but the seat we were in faced the other way. We couldn't figure out how to clip the safety bar, and my sister started panicking. I reassured her, saying someone would come to check the safety bars, but no one did. The ride started and we lost it. We screamed and yelled, trying to get the operators to stop the ride because we weren't secured. My sister kept saying we were going to die. When the ride finally stopped, we ran to our dad crying while other riders laughed at us. It was traumatizing, and the worst part was that no one at the park did anything about it. We didn't get our day passes reimbursed, and the operator who was supposed to check our safety bars didn't face any consequences. We just went back to the hotel and cried ourselves to sleep. Story 45. Over the past decade, I've made plenty of mistakes on motorcycles. I've totaled 2 bikes and crashed several others. But the one that still haunts me is because I almost killed my friend too. I was leading a ride on a country road with my buddy staggered behind me. We had already overtaken a few slow-moving trucks, and we were stuck behind a big rig going well under the speed limit. I waited for a safe moment to pass, checked for oncoming traffic, and told my buddy over our Bluetooth headsets that it was time to go. What I didn't see was a car hidden in the gut of a hill, a perfect blind spot. We had to brake hard. My bike had ABS, but his didn't. I could hear his tire screeching behind me, so I had to let off my brakes and speed up to avoid him rear-ending me. At the last second, we split the oncoming car and the big rig, narrowly avoiding disaster. I felt so responsible for the near miss that I was almost in tears when we pulled over. I couldn't believe I had almost killed both of us. It was a harsh lesson learned on 2 wheels. Story 46. When I was really young, I was in swimming lessons. It was the level just past using the tot dock, so I wasn't a strong swimmer yet. After class, I was slow getting out of the pool area, and most of the people had already left. I wasn't running, but I was doing that fast skip walking kids do. I had a full-sized beach towel with me, which was way too big for my small frame. As I was hurrying to the locker room, I was walking along the very edge of the pool, and I slipped and fell in. The towel wrapped around me, and I couldn't tell which way was up. The water wasn't too deep, but I was completely disoriented, trapped in the heavy, wet towel. I nearly drowned, but luckily, one of the instructors heard me and jumped in to save me. My dad, who was nearby, didn't even notice.